Good morning, everyone. Welcome along to this extraordinary meeting of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee. I'll declare the meeting open and welcome those who are joining us on our live stream. Attending on Zoom, we have Councillors, Councillor Abbott, Mrs. Coote, Reverend Cook, Rhiannon. I have an apology from Councillor Pottinger. No others that I'm aware of.
I'll move that.
I second it.
Moved and seconded. Put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. If there are any declarations of interest, remember that they can be made at the time the item comes up. Next step for the City Block and City Streets deliberations. Welcome along, Alex. We're only just starting. Rhiannon, would you like to introduce the paper for us, please?
Councillors, so Hayden Powell, who's our policy advisor, he's going to run you through the submissions and what we heard from the public.
Thanks. Welcome, Hayden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Morning, councillors. This consultation follows on from previous consultations in 2019 and 2020. This consultation asked the public what their thoughts were on the City Block funding and City Centre Streets Stage 2. Closer. PPP received the submissions and heard from the submitters on 17 February 2022. 79 submitted, which was less than previous consultations. This was expected due to the widespread communications that had gone on with this, and also being the third time that people had the chance to submit on the subject. Submissions for City Block showed that 74.7% were in favour of Council's preferred option, 8.9% in favour of the alternative option, and 16.5% either did not select an option or stated they were against it. Submissions for the City Centre Streets upgrade showed 48.1% in favour of the Council preferred option, 29.1% in favour of the alternative option, with 22.8% either not answering it or not in support at all. The outcome for the consultation was clear, with a significant majority of submitters supporting the Council preferred option for the City Block funding. With City Centre Streets submitters, there was support for further fund upgrades, with 48% in favour of Council preferred option and 29% supporting the more expensive option that was put up as well. As you see, Rhiannon has joined us on Zoom as well. We'll have to take any questions that the councillors may have.
Thanks, Hayden. Questions, councillors? You had a chance to read through the submissions prior to last week. You had a chance to hear a few submitters, just bearing in mind that during the submissions there were some points that were made that were off topic. We note those, but they're not really forming part of the decisions that we're making this morning. Minutes can also note that Councillors Lush and Kett have joined the meeting. Any questions for Hayden? Councillor Clark.
No, question for Michael Moore. In the paper it talks about the option costing $13.6 million as an increased cost. So just a statement on that and then a question. That seems an awfully big overspend on what we initially forecast for this project. But secondly, and quite rightly, you've forecast for us that would impact on a 1.3% increase. So my question is around, are there other alternatives as opposed to potentially pushing up rates? Because that 1.3 is significant, because it's not just 1.3 next year, it goes into the base rate that households provide, and it compounds. So next year it won't be 1.3, it'll be 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, whatever the impact is. So that keeps escalating upwards if you build it in, as opposed to somehow funding it with other sources. So I'd like your view on that. And secondly, I'd like to know what other options we've got in front of us as opposed to a rate increase.
Mr. Day.
Through yourself, the Chair, all funding options were reviewed as part of the process. When it comes down to funding projects of this nature, sadly borrowing is the only way, and the rates impact that you are looking at is in relation to the repayment of that borrowing. It's not a one-off payment to secure those funds. It is actually a rating repayment from that perspective, borrowing repayment from that perspective.
Yeah, supplementary question to that. I appreciate that, and borrowing's probably the way to go. But borrowing and paying back what you borrow is not just on this one project. It's a much wider picture than that, as we all know. And so one of the issues for me is what's happened to the funds that were made available by the sale of the farm. Was that money used to reduce debt? And if it was, and we are subsequently pushing some more borrowing into that debt area, surely it must be fiscally neutral if we're looking to increase our debt loading by 13.6. And let's say, for argument's sake, we got $11 or $12 million for the farm sale, and I don't know what that was, but if that was the case, then surely it wouldn't be a 1.3 increase.
Through yourself, Chair, just touching on the topic of the, I believe it's the Ororua farm that we are talking about. That will be coming back at the next PPP, but I confirm there's no additional funds that can be used for other ventures of this nature, but also that those are ring-fence funds from prospective investment properties at this stage. Council would need to make a resolution to shift any funds out of investment properties, but having said that, it is coming back and you'll get the net result in relation to the next PPP meeting.
Further questions? Councillor Amundsen.
I have a couple of questions also. First one is around the piazza and the increase of 15 million. And just looking at the document that we put out for consultation, it talked about the piazza being the responsibility of the developer. And looking at an article that appeared in the newspaper, I think when the consultation document came out, it said that the piazza was included in the scope of the work. So can I just get some clarification about whether the increase in the budget is because of the reasons that we've outlined in the consultation document, which includes the increase in construction costs, bank fees, and the costs of incentives, or whether it is because we're adding in something new to the proposal?
Through yourself, Chair. I'll ask Rhiannon to make a quick comment.
So through you, Chair, regarding the consultation document, those details are correct. With the issues around the piazza, the consultation is around the additional funding required to make the connections to the piazza rather than to fund the piazza itself, which fits within the wider project. It is quite a complex area of the project, so it's not surprising perhaps that the article didn't pick that up completely accurately. So it is around connections, things like lifts, and the connecting the existing areas of the mall to that piazza.
Thanks for that clarification.
Cool. My other questions are around the risks that have been identified in this proposal. And I guess my first question about that is, it says that there is a short-term or a low risk somewhere with the bank funding, that it should come back to us within 2 years. What is the plan if that doesn't happen? Because I'm very aware that we've identified lots of risks along the way in this project, and most of them have actually been realised so far. So I'm wondering what will happen when this risk is realised.
I'll defer to Michael on that question.
He's demasking as we speak.
Through yourself, Chair. Yes, there is a low risk associated to that. We are monitoring in relation to rentals. That is the key figure from our perspective. There's already enough rentals actually signed up to lower the risk to a very low risk from our perspective, and that's why we've flagged it. The realisation of that is, of course, always possible because it is a risk and it will stay as a risk. Should that come to fruition, we will need to look at the finances in year 2 to see what we do from a capital application going forward. It does affect our debt cap, but we do have capacity if council desired to re-look at that at that time.
And I guess following on from that then, is there any risk that the bank will change the rules again, given that there are lots of changes happening in the finance area with, you know, inflation and all of those kinds of things?
Yourself, Chair. I'm not at liberty to say what the bank will and won't do. From our perspective at the moment, they've got an agreement with the bank. What the bank does between buyer and seller at that particular point, I can't guarantee. My interest in looking is getting out of it as quick as possible from a ratepayer's point of view. So we are looking at it respective of once that 2 years up, then we want to be out as fast as we can.
So I guess following on from that, the further risk that I can see is that many of the tenants that are moving into the city block are residents at the moment on the north side of Esk Street, and we're essentially taking all of those people and putting them somewhere else, which is leaving a whole block of shops potentially vacant, which I see as a risk for council, especially with the streetscape work that we're doing. Is there anything in the pipeline, or is there anything that we should be doing at this point in time to help mitigate that risk? Because I see that as, you know, potentially quite detrimental to the city, especially if our goal is around that community outcome and enhancing the entire CBD and is not purely focused on a shopping mall.
I think that actually falls out of the purvey of what we're trying to do, and I don't actually see it as any different as, say, the anchor tenant. So we might skip past that one. There's no way to mitigate that type of risk. People will move around from one building to another anyway, and that's part of normal business. I'm not sure what we could do to mitigate, apart from what we're doing in the streetscapes to make it an attractive area.
I guess I'm not necessarily looking at mitigation because it's too late for that. I'm thinking of what are we going to do to address it.
I'll come back to the streetscapes that we're improving in the area to attract business. I think it's about the only thing we could answer with. Within what we can do legally. Council's not in a position to pay incentives to people to come and occupy premise owned by individual landlords.
But we're doing it with the city block.
Exactly. We're not doing that. That's out of order. Mrs. Hadley? Sorry.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to remind all councillors and any members of the public that this development is unusual in the resource consent requirements, that the doors of the mall that face onto Esk Street must remain open. And that is a particularly unusual step in terms of planning, and it's one that I would expect Trudy's team to be really focused on ensuring that we have compliance with that at all times.
Any further questions, Councillor? So I've got Councillor Lewis, His Worship, and Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Chair. The dialogue between Mr. Day and Councillor Upmanson has covered my question.
Thank you. Your Worship.
Yes, the impression I got from the submissions that were made is that they want the job to go ahead, regardless of some of the finer details. And when we had little ticky tours and that, it was suggested again there that the worst thing that could happen, or the greatest risk, is that if the project is half finished and we've just got to get the job done. It seemed to be the attitude I picked up.
Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question's in relation to the city centre street upgrade and the number of submitters who unusually preferred the more expensive option. And that we've made the comment that perhaps we didn't communicate as well as we could the reason that council made the recommendation we did for the other option, being that some submitters might not have been aware that the additional roading space that the alternative option included was at risk of being developed and relaid in the short to medium term. I'm just asking about a communication strategy. In announcing the results of our deliberation, are we going to emphasise that point a little bit for the sake of our ratepayers who preferred the more expensive option, just so it's clear if that's our decision?
I think, to be fair, we would only be speculating on why that was their option, and we haven't made a decision yet.
I can speak to that, Chair, if you wish.
Yes,
Thank
thanks, Rhiannon.
I think just when we analysed the results and looked back at the way the consultation document was worded, I do think on reflection that point around why you as a council made the decision for the preferred option wasn't adequately communicated in the consultation document. So yes, it is an assumption, but it's one that we put forward to you, so that I do think it is probably a correct assumption, and we would certainly communicate whatever your outcome of your decision is, the reasons behind that, and make sure that we pick that up in the communications around City Street Stage 2.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions at this stage? Councillor Clark.
Just some clarification on when stage 2 commences. Would be helpful.
Who wants to have a crack at that? Rhiannon?
Stage 2 will commence next financial year, but as I'm not sure of the exact date at this moment, I would need to ask the roading manager.
And just a flow on from that, and reflection of what Beck's raised. Yeah, I support what Claire was saying. I think the nature of commercial businesses, you need foot traffic, and the mall will definitely generate that. So anything spilling out into the mall, into Esk and any of the peripheral streets will be more attractive than they currently are. We've got our city spread, and this is going to pull it all back in together. I don't see the casualties being in Esk Street. I think the gaps will be further out than that as people move in.
Thank you. Any further questions at this stage? Well, we'll go through the recommendations, and we'll take the first two for a start, which is receive the next steps for City Block and City Streets deliberations, and note the submissions that have been received. Somebody wish to move? Councillor Scout, Councillor Soper, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just to reflect that I'm in opposition of receiving the report at this stage. I think the report should be left on the table. The next PPP committee is about 3 weeks away. We will get the investment report then, and I think we need that part of the puzzle before we start deciding on whether we up the funding level for this, given that it puts a 1.3% increase onto the rates that we've got in our long-term plan, which will compound year after year. So I think we do our ratepayers a disservice if we're not looking at what investments we've got, which is an option to fund this as opposed to pushing rates up. And until we get some clarity on what's happened to the sale price of the Awarua farm, and for those and I'm only first term, but I can remember Dave saying to us way back, you cannot consider each investment or each property you have as a normal house. You don't have mortgages or debt loading on each one individually. We actually have a pool of debt in council, about $90 million, which we fund. If you go beyond 90 million, rates are going to go up. If you can drop that level down and then reinvest the money and stay within the 90 million parameter, your rates wouldn't go up. And so what I want to be able to identify is, when we get the investment report, is what's happening to the money that we get from the Awarua farm, because we can reallocate that money elsewhere. Or if we can't, we make it happen. So
Thanks.
my-
I note the comment. You're correct. We can allocate the funds elsewhere if there are any. But at the same time, I think we need to recognise that this isn't the only project that we're looking to borrow on. And if there is funding that we're able to reallocate elsewhere, then it may be able to go on to those other projects. However, your comment is noted. Councillor Scalp.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I can't agree with Councillor Clark on this one, in the sense that we've got an overwhelming positive response from the community and a mandate from the community to move forward. It's very clear. And this is our pinnacle project, so we've invested in it heavily. And I understand Michael from his thoughts in the paper that the risk content is very low. So I think we need to actually show some real leadership today and move forward.
Reverend Cook.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I too wish to say that we have been told by the public that they are actually liking what they see already and they want it finished. I think we would be remiss if we did not hear what they are saying, because I think the document did outline that there were, there was a potential for increased cost, all those sorts of things, but they want it done. And we have that goodwill, we have their energy, and we need to honour it. Thank you.
Councillor Lush.
Yeah, just as far as the briefing document goes with them, and we talk about the increase in the percentage and rates and stuff like that, for me it was frustrating to not know how much each household in Invercargill was contributing to the mall. Can you tell me how much money that was? I mean, how many thousands that is per household that they would be paying? Because you say 1.5%, it becomes very confusing.
Mr. Day, do you want to have a crack at that?
I will try, your Chair. From the mall perspective, diversing the city block from the actual streetscapes, it's very hard to actually calculate that on the fly. That is something I can come back to.
Yeah, we received the paper from this meeting at council this afternoon, so we can bring that figure back to you then.
Well, how many households are there that pay rates?
It's roughly 22,500.
Okay. Because just to comment too with the submissions, I thought it was telling that only 3 people came up to present these submissions. One of them was the Green Wizard that talked about e-bike charges. One of the guys was very vehemently opposed to it, and one guy just wanted to talk about traffic for Te Wakahuia. So I'm not so certain about the submissions as though they are. I think you ask if they want a mall, they say yes. If you say, okay, you're going to have a mall, but you're going to pay this much every year for the next so many years, I think if you dug deeper, I'm not so sure there is such a will for the mall, and I don't think we could see that from the submissions I read. So yeah, I'd just like to say that.
Note your comment, but I guess from having sat at the table for a few years, I can assure you that when people object to things, they let you know vociferously. I note what you're saying, and sometimes people choosing not to submit can be read one way or another, but like I say, those who object are more likely to stand up and speak forward rather than those who are okay with it, just as an observation. But we've got a mover and second for the first 2 recommendations anyway, and I don't hear any more questions around those, so I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Yes, I'll record against.
Thanks. Note that, Councillor Clark. Carried. Recommendation 3, the recommendation seeks direction, so I'm looking for a motion from the table. Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move recommendation 3 with the alternative that consider and determine the community wellbeing outcomes do not outweigh the risks identified for further investment in city block.
I'd second that, Chair.
Noted. I just had to double check on the context of how it was worded. So moved.
Sorry, I'm just doing the same,
Yep.
Mr. Chair. Perhaps the
Do you wish to be
Perhaps the-
negative or the positive?
the positive.
In which case, could I suggest that you just say determine the community wellbeing outcomes outweigh the risks identified, and take out all of the do
That
and
would
do
be
not.
a much simpler way of making sure everyone understands that.
Councillor Lewis, you comfortable with that amendment? Councillor Amundsen.
Thanks. I guess this comes back to what I've raised earlier about the risks and the concern that I have that so far throughout this project since it started in 2015, most of the risks that have been identified have been realised. So right back at the beginning of this project, we were assured that we would be landholders only and that a developer would come in and finance and do the development. And that risk was realised when a developer did not show up at our doorstep, and we have now got ourselves in the situation where we are in partnership with the development. Council then sought some independent advice around how we can ensure that the development does meet our requirements under the community outcomes, about being outward facing, about being something that actually revitalises the whole city and not just creates a mall that is inward focused and sucks everybody into it. Again, that information was put forward to ICL to be included as part of the development of the plans, and that was a risk that was realised and not done. From the beginning, we were told that retailers would flock to Invercargill and take up tenancies in this mall if it was not an earthquake-prone building. And if we created, a build it and they will come, despite the fact that we were also told that most developers don't start doing a development until they have approximately 80% of the tenants signed up. Yet we went ahead and with the mall with 2 tenants signed up, or kind of signed up, and now we're in this position where we have to provide this bank funding because of the tenancy situation. Throughout this process, we have been the biggest investor in the development from a financial point of view, not just within the mall itself, but by the time you add in all the streetscape work around the outside as well. Yet we seem to have very little influence. We have an outstanding person who represents us on the ICL board, but it seems that most of the initiatives or things that we would like to see as part of the mall are not able to happen. And so I just guess I want to raise again the fact that some risks have been identified here, and are we prepared for these risks to become a reality, like all of these other risks that we have had? And are we prepared to make more sacrifices of other council projects or initiatives? I mean, we've put off the water tower because we didn't have enough money in the long-term plan to do it. We have done something not as good as we possibly could have with Anderson House for the same reasons. And we are investing a whole lot of money in the city streetscape, which I do hope will help to counter some of the potential negatives that might happen. And I guess hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I sometimes think to myself, what would have happened if we had have taken that original $25 million that we put into this project, that was to be the extent of our investment in this project, and we had have used that to enhance our built heritage buildings? And would that have possibly been a braver, bolder and more transformational thing for us to have done? So whilst I'm going to vote in favour of this because we have made a commitment and we are on the pathway and it would be irresponsible not to, I really do think we need to bear in mind that more of these risks might be realised as we go through this project. And where do we draw the line around how much more money we invest in it and how much more things we sacrifice from a council point of view of other projects that we might want to do? And I'm thinking of the museum in particular, but there's lots of other things that we could be doing to enhance our city and to create a city with heart.
So just to clarify, you are speaking in support of the motion?
I'm speaking in support of the motion, but raising the issues around the risks, because we have identified risks and there are many of them that have been realised already, and there's nothing to say that the risks that have been identified here will equally not be realised and put in jeopardy other projects that the council might want to be part of, or other things, you know, that the council might want to do.
Thanks. I mean, that's why risks are identified. One of the things that wasn't identified in the initial risk profile was a global pandemic, nor the very rapidly changing geopolitical situation in the Northern Hemisphere. But that said, we do need to be cognizant of the risks. Other questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Lewis.
Very briefly, Chair, thank you. If we had delayed the initial start of the inner city development, I would hate to think what the escalation in prices of building materials would have resulted in as far as increased costs go. I think it's quite prudent to start it. Certainly there are uncertainties which have come through, but if it had been delayed, with the building materials estimated to go up between 20 to 40%, then the prices would be major and the risks would be extensive, and the cost increases would be so much of an impact it probably wouldn't have happened. It would be still back in the time warp of many years ago with broken down buildings in the middle of town. So I'm really pleased that we actually made that call, dug in and did it, and the development is continuing. And sure, some extra costs come up. There will be always with things like pandemics, but I think we've done the right thing. I'm very happy to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I suppose for me it goes back to the philosophy and the principles on which we made the decision in the first place, was that we saw a need to create a heart for our community that was missing. And the summary from people on the street who still talk to us about this project is that is the community wellbeing they are most hoping to get out of this. Not a simple shopping mall, but a heart back in the city that was missing. For me, you can second guess almost any decision a previous council has taken, and you can think, what if we had done this or that? The fact is, we took the decision we did to go ahead with an exciting project that the majority of our populace was telling us was an exciting project they wanted, because we were looking for community outcomes that would make a step change for the Invercargill and Southland community. I think this project still delivers that. Yes, there are other very important projects for the city, including the museum, that we have to take forward in the best way possible, but I don't think it takes away from the fact that this project was always about delivering the best for what our community said they wanted, and that's why I'm very keen that we make sure this does deliver everything our community have pretty much by the majority constantly said they wanted. And I just remind councillors of the very fact that the City Streets Upgrade alternative option, which was the more expensive option, was the one that our submitters preferred, speaks for itself. Submitters who read the consultation document saw that the difference there in the rates increase was between 1.3% with the option council was recommending, or 1.5% for the more expensive option that many of them said they preferred. And the reason most of those who preferred the more expensive option gave was that they wanted it finished and they wanted the best job possible done. So for me, all the philosophical and principled reasons for which we made the decision in the first place to invest in this project are still very much there, and this is our chance to follow through on that, and I'm very pleased that we have accepted the report and are going ahead, because for me that's to have actually hesitated to have set this aside for a few weeks to another meeting would have been the wrong decision for us. Thank you.
Thanks. As the original mover of the motion, You get the final right of reply, so I'll close off there. There's nothing new. Sorry, Councillor Lush.
Yeah, it's caused me a great deal of consternation, this whole situation with them all. You talk about people, if they're motivated, they will make submissions, and you haven't heard much. From an outsider, and I was an outsider until 30 months ago before I ran for council, what was going on with council with them all was incredibly confusing. And, I think we see on social media apps how the people of Invercargill communicate with stories and news. They're not diving deep. They don't have a huge amount of understanding, because most of what happens in council appears to be stuff that is confusing or too esoteric, or something that they're not really interested in. They pay their rates, they get on with it, give them a mall, they'll say yay. To me, this has been, from the very beginning, not only a bad idea, but an idea that there wasn't even mandated by the election or by the people. For me, when we wandered around the mall with that open day, and I saw that farmers took up most of it, there was so very little facing to the road with shops, I found it an incredibly heartbreaking experience to wander around the city where I've been for 20 years and see it pretty much just like a giant box store or giant farmers. I know in a week's time we're going to be considering the museum, whose job is to preserve the tauranga that are in this city, to preserve our treasures. But at the same time, we've demolished a whole block. So I think in all earnestness, we can't get behind a museum about preserving our city when we're involved in destroying our city. And when we look at the tenants that have come reluctantly, we look at the shops we've lost, Zookeeper's Cafe, one of the country's great cafes, the Venom hairdresser, Councillor Kett's lolly shop. We've lost all of this for what, Cotton On and Glassons, and that's it. And it just, I mean, as a new councillor, I have trouble getting behind a project like this. I'm not quite sure which way we can go to stop it happening. Chair, you talk about a global pandemic and troubles in the Northern Europe. I can't understand what that's got to do with it. I would even think with the likes of things like this, we want to now look in if there's some sort of clause we can get out of this. If there's some sort of, I know most contracts have a clause that you can get yourself out of a situation like that, because I see this when there's a mentality of let's just get it done so we can go to the election and get re-elected and say we've done this. I just don't think it stacks up. I think we've got to blow this whole thing up, work out what its value is, and get ourselves out of the whole deal, because I'm in a situation where I think if we look at it going forward, we can. I just think we've all got rose-tinted glasses with how well it's going to turn out. None of it seems to be turning out well, from the design to the execution to the tenancy. So, yeah, that's my rant over. But I just think that we continue to get ourselves involved in commercial deals through, I don't know what it's through lack of leadership or what, that seem to produce very poor outcomes for Invercargill. I've been here for 20 years. We didn't get the Kakaporium going. We didn't get the Invercargill child-friendly thing going. There's no vision. We just seem to go from bad commercial decision to bad commercial decision. And I can't even work out when it's going to stop. And if we go on with the situation now, this time, then what's going to happen further down the track? We're going to get involved with something else because the lessons aren't going to be learned. So that's my take on it. How that talks to that motion, I'm not entirely sure.
Me neither.
But I feel that it's a voice that needs to be heard. That we just, through steps, we get ourselves involved with something that's. I think the opening day we go there, we get a Cotton On, we get a Sal's Pizza, we get a Glassons. Shops we've probably pretty much already got, and that's all the money from all the ratepayers gone. That's going to prevent all the other exciting things happening for Invercargill.
Just to note that Venom are at 20 Don Street. The geopolitical situation in the Northern Hemisphere can have an impact on global markets, which affects finance rates. Those were those references. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just a couple of reflections on what my colleagues have said. Don't disagree with most of it. For your benefit, Marcus, you asked what the debt loading would be with the $70 million we put into streetscapes and the mall. It's about $3,100 per ratepayer. So if you've got a house and you're paying rates on it, that's what your share of the debt's gone up by my calculation. That's simply 70 million divided by, as Michael said, 22,500 ratepayers. When we look at the potential increase for this streetscape, which we're now discussing, it's 1.3, and that impact is about 80 cents per week per ratepayer. So it's not significant, and we get pretty scared on these 1.3 going up, and I'm still nervous about that because it does compound, but it's less than $1 a week per ratepayer to get the streetscapes finished to the level that we've been asked to do.
Councillors, any further questions? Just a reminder that when you're not speaking, if you could put your mask on, thanks. Councillor Kett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having lived and breathed that city block for 35 years as not only a business owner but a manager and a building owner, I was very nervous 5 years ago when it was mooted that maybe council be involved in a brand new city block. But as it nears its completion, I'm getting excited. We've had hurdles. We've had a developer pull out of 21 million. We've had hurdles all along the way. It's getting to that stage where it's almost finished, and I believe it'll do so much for our city, not only our city but our province, also with the 2 new hotels in the CBD. All this will attract thousands of visitors to our city. And I would probably rate it right up there. The number of years I've been on council, we put a lot of effort in behind obtaining SIT zero fees. The stadium, the rebuild of the stadium after the snow in 2010, the velodrome, the airport. I think we'll be very, very proud, and we should be proud of this great, huge building, the whole city block, and what it will do for our city and people that come to visit our city. As I said earlier, it'll attract thousands of visitors. So bring it on.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor, or comments rather, since we've moved to that part? Councillor Arnold.
I might have a comments, and I haven't had one yet, but I fully support quite a few of the other councillors. Councillor Kett, I think this is the most exciting thing that's happened in Invercargill in my lifetime. I've been here my entire life, and I think this is a transformational for Invercargill. And I think because of what's happened, that's one of the reasons why you're actually getting the second hotel. And I just think it's just it'll be evolve as time goes by. I mean, I'm fully supportive and just want to see the thing finished. And I'm aware that the submitters that we did have, the majority want the same thing. They want a good product and a good outcome, and it will transform Invercargill. Simple.
Thank you. Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As the mover of the motion, I thought I'd made the final comment, but I just feel that one should stick by tradition and let the mover have the final comment, unless my seconder wants to say something further. I think the last 2 speakers have illustrated for me some of the actual excitement that is there in our community for this project. And I just want to reflect as a former comment, as some people spoke in this debate, I remembered some of the controversy of the Eve Paul Library proposal and building of many years ago, and the way in which there was similar adamant negative feeling about that building. The council of that time bravely went forward and built it because it was the right thing to do. It was a great community outcome and it was very much needed. That library has proudly sat there for many years, being one of the great attractors in our centre city. We have now taken the decision that we can add something equally as exciting and fundamental as a community wellbeing delivery that will actually support and I believe make that library even more used than it currently is, and bring back even more life to that centre city and pride to that centre city. And thanks to the last 2 speakers who actually mentioned the pride aspect. So, as I said in my earlier speech, I think this is not the moment for any cold feet or any reflections on perhaps we should halt the proposal or lessen the proposal in any ways. I remember very clearly the principles of democracy. We invited a consultation. We got very firmly from the members of the public who responded the signal that they wished us to go ahead. I believe that those submitters were well aware of the rates increase that implied for the time it did, and that they wanted a project they see as exciting to go ahead. And I didn't think that this particular recommendation would cause quite this much debate. It seemed to me a simple matter of whether community wellbeing outcomes did outweigh the risks, and I thought the risks were very clearly defined and reasonably minor in terms of this project. So I'm very comfortable to have moved this motion, and I do urge all councillors to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. With that in mind, I will now put the motion, which is consider and determine the community wellbeing outcomes outweigh the risks identified for further investment in City Block. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
Carried. Resolution 4. If somebody wishes to move, considering whether to increase Council's investment into City Block by up to 7.5 million to be funded through loan funding, noting there's no anticipated impact on rates. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Arnold, seconded. Councillor Skelt. That's open for discussion. Bearing in mind we've all pretty much expressed good comment through on that item 3. If there is none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 5 is to consider whether to provide a $22.75 million short-term loan to City Block developers to be funded through loan funding, noting that there is no anticipated impact on rates. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Scott, Councillor Arnold. Comments?
Well, again,
Yes, Your Worship.
Mr. Chair, it's
Take your
similar,
mask off, thanks, sir. Thank you.
as you say, it's a similar situation of really stopping or going, and we have to take notice of the submitters as well. And every time it was raised at different stages, the overwhelming feeling I got was that the worst possible scenario is if the job isn't finished. And I think we've really got little choice at this stage but to back it for all we can and make sure that it's a success.
Thank you, sir. It's been moved and seconded. There are no further comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 6 is determine to or not to increase funding through the annual plan into the city streets by 13.6, which is the preferred option, be loan funded, noting the forecast of 1.3% increase in rates. Councillor Amundsen.
I'm happy to move that we do go with the 13.6.
Second that.
Moved and seconded. It's open for comment.
Everyone's got a hand up.
Sorry, Reverend Cook.
Yes, I am going to declare a perception of interest as Waihoparunaka has a contract to deliver part of the streetscape project. So I will not be voting.
Noted. Thank you for that. So with that one abstention, I'll now put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
Yeah, I'm opposed.
Noting Councillor Clark's opposition, or vote against rather. Councillor Amundsen.
just going back to what I've already mentioned, I did wonder whether there was any appetite for council to put a line in the sand about this being the extent of our funding for this project. Just putting it out there. Now's the time, I assume, to do that.
Well, if there was any further increase required again, that would also need to go out for consultation. Okay, that brings item 3 to a close, and we move on to item 4, which is targeted consultation. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. So this matter relates to two specific streets, Northwood Avenue and Richfield Drive, and a targeted consultation with homeowners that would be affected by a change in the addressing and numbering. So the reports for information, just to let you know, we will be communicating with those homeowners today to let them know following this meeting of this proposed plan. As the report outlines, it does arise for a change in the planning around the road layout, which has happened over the decade over which the development's been done, and means that the current road layout no longer makes logical sense. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Rhiannon. So really an informative procedure, 2 recommendations. Somebody prepared to move? Councillor Scout, Councillor Kett. Questions or comments? There are none. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Third item is the paper on grants funding for the annual plan. Again, Rhiannon.
So thank you, Chair. Yes, this paper relates to grants funding in consideration of funding decisions for the next financial year. So you may recall that in 2020, Council undertook a review of its funds, and at that point that resulted in the Community Wellbeing Fund being formed, and this paper outlines the progress of that fund and meeting its priorities, which was around better alignment with Council's vision and strategic goals, creating a more flexible fund that was easier for members of the community to understand and to apply for. So at the time of that review, there were a number of other small funds that were overlooked. So I'm putting these forward for your consideration, at least this time. So the first of those is the Urban Rejuvenation Fund, which was a small fund that was linked to the Urban Rejuvenation Committee. So there are some options there for you to consider for the allocation of that funding in the next financial year. The recommended option is to transfer that amount of funding to the Community Wellbeing Fund, and for that fund to be able to consider those applications. So essentially, urban rejuvenation projects kind of already apply to the Community Wellbeing Fund. The second amount is around a reallocation of a fund that was a previous LTP or annual plan amount. So the strategic focus for council is really to provide everyone with a kind of level playing field in terms of how we receive funding applications. So the recommendation is that that Community Wellbeing Fund be increased by the amount of the previous funding allocation, and for the Southern Warm Homes Trust to be able to apply to the Community Wellbeing Fund. And the third element is the Emergency Grant Fund, which was a fund that was previously held within the mayoral budget. It was there to enable council to respond to emergency events. It is out of alignment with the revenue and financing policy. So it's recommended to remove that funding amount from the annual plan budget. So happy to take any questions.
Councillor Lewis, comment from you.
I'm actually quite happy to move the first 3 recommendations which apply to this. This is going to result in standardisation of the application of ratepayers funded money. It's not going to result in any extra funds being allocated, because if the funds aren't allocated within the financial year, it rolls over and we start again. So it may actually result in some saving. At the present time, we have quite a few applications which to our Community Wellbeing Fund, which are being held over because of the pandemic. If the conditions don't change as far as number of participants at events, we're going to lose that money. We're not going to lose it, we're just not going to spend it, so it will be a saving to ratepayers anyway. But the standardisation of the extra funds, as Rhiannon has mentioned, I think will put a level playing field for all applicants, not specifically targeted to other people who have a preferential treatment, so to speak.
Is it a saving, or does it accumulate?
It doesn't. We can't roll over the funds for the Community Wellbeing Fund to the next year. We have some delay. If an application for an event that doesn't go on straight away, they have up to 18 months to apply for that fund. We have funds which are, at the moment, quite a few funds which unfortunately haven't been picked up. Councillor Skelp would be quite aware of that with the situation of COVID. It's not money that's destined for 2 years down the track, but there is a slight delay should the event be able to be held. So it could result in a saving. In some respect, we hope not, because it would mean the events aren't being carried out for the benefit of our ratepayers.
So I'll come to Councillor Abbott in just a moment, but you were moving?
I would like to move the first 3 recommendations.
First 3.
Well, the other one doesn't apply to the Community Wellbeing Fund.
You'd still move it?
Yep, let's move it.
No.
Sorry, was that a yes or no?
No, I would like to move the first 3.
3, okay. Is there a second for that?
Yeah, I'll
Councillor Abbott, thank you. Councillor, did you have something to add?
No, I was just listening to what Graham said. Agree, concur.
Thank you. Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to remind Council that I am the appointee on the Southern Warm Homes Trust. Now, that is an appointment that is made technically by EIL, but it is included in Council's appointment registers. That means that I should not vote on recommendation 3. I'm very comfortable to vote on the others, but I just do want to point out that I think it would be wise for me not to vote on recommendation 3. And if the movers didn't mind adjusting their move to accommodate that, it might be helpful.
Yep, so
I'm quite happy to change it to taking it one by one through the 3.
Councillor Abbott, you comfortable with that? 1 by 1? Thank you. Let's do that then. Recommendation 1, receive the report grants funding annual plan. It's been moved. Councillor Lewis, seconded Councillor Abbott. Questions or comments? If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 2, agree to reallocate 15,000 in funding from the Urban Rejuvenation Fund to the Community Wellbeing Fund. Moved. Councillor Lewis, seconded Councillor Abbott. Open for comment. There is none. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Recommendation 3, agree to increase the Community Wellbeing Fund by $50,000. Again, moved Councillor Lewis, seconded Councillor Abbott, noting the abstention of Councillor Soper. Questions or comments? Is that just your arms standing up there, Councillor Arnold, or?
Correct.
Thank you. If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. That brings us to recommendation 4, looking for a mover or not. Somebody prepared to move the $100,000 allocated for emergency grants be removed. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I'll move that.
Seconder, Councillor Amundsen. Open for comment.
Yes.
Councillor, Your Worship.
The when we had the first lot of flooding, we made a grant of 100,000, I believe, to Southland District and Gore Council. Does that would that be able to be used for a situation like that again? What we had to do was pass a resolution at council.
Your Worship, if there were an emergency that arose that council felt the need, it wanted to contribute to, a motion could come to the table at any stage. Any other questions or comments?
Just that motion. Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Abbott, sorry.
Just a question. So it's really just a contingency fund?
I don't think it's been drawn on. In
That's
quite
what I
some
mean.
time.
It just sits there. Sits there.
Correct. Councillor Clark.
And that's the issue, it just sits there. And it could be used elsewhere. I think it has been drawn on once from my memory for a particular case in Matara. I think we drew a small amount. Claire might be able to help with that. But either way, why would we lock in funds when we can be using them elsewhere and just consider on a case-by-case basis?
Mr. Chair, the donation that was given to the flooding that occurred in February 2022, in fact, was not required because there were not as many calls as had been anticipated. If there was an event, then you would be able to resolve to contribute as you saw fit. But it's officer advice that it's inappropriate to be rating today's ratepayers for an event that might not occur. And it's not that you are actually developing a battle fund, so to speak. It becomes part of the surplus at the year end. So it would be more appropriate to cease the practice.
February 2020. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just reading the option, remove the 100,000 from the annual budget and address requests for emergency funds which arise on a case-by-case basis. So it's still available. It's to apply case-by-case basis, but it's not rated for, which is a saving. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Councillors, there are no further items in general business. Therefore, we will be moving to discuss the items in public excluded, which includes the Great South Draft Statement of Intent. The reasons listed in the agenda under 7.2b2 of the LGA. There is also a minor late item on the city block funding, which is informative rather than seeking a decision. So with that addition, I'll move that we go into public excluded. Councillor Clark.
Just before we move, Chair, with your blessing, one of the issues I still struggle with a little bit, and this was raised at the beginning of the term in 2019, was when we go into a public excluded, how long do the minutes of those meetings stay public excluded? Now, some should stay there forever because they're commercially sensitive, or they might be staff related. But we don't seem to have developed, even though we said we were going to, a process where we would review what's in PE and what can subsequently be released. And we, at the time, we kicked around issues like, as we discuss something in PE, we could say, yep, this needs to stay there for 3 months, 6 months, a year, forever. Or we could do an annual review, or the staff could do an annual review, or somebody could. Because it just seems to me it just gets lost in the system and it never comes to light. And sometimes the reasons for it being in public excluded is only a short-term thing while we consider issues, or it might be commercially sensitive that aren't a year or two later. So just wanted to flag that, that we always get criticism that we take too much into PE, or we seem to. And so the defence of that is, well, we need to have it in PE, but we will release when it's appropriate. But we just don't get to that stage.
So I'll go to Mrs. Hadley in just a moment, but preempt that with a great deal less is held in public excluded these days than used to be in the past.
Sure.
This council and previous councils have challenged what goes into public excluded, and I have chaired meetings where there was a recommendation to go into public excluded. The councillor has presented information that challenged that, and I've agreed that they've been correct, and we've ended up taking them in public. So that system for challenging what we discuss in PE is more vigorous now than it used to be. In some circumstances, you're quite right. The information does need to remain out of the public eye because of commercial sensitivity. In some instances, a statement is able to be issued after the meeting. But Claire, do you wish to go further?
Mr. Chair, I would just draw councillors' attention to the reports in public excluded that set out in the table at the start, the section of the Act, the plain English reason, and when the report can be released. Now, we are working harder, to get more of a practice around proactively released reports, and we are looking at including such a section on the website. Like many things, it's not something that's resolved overnight, but in the words of the ad, it will happen.
Comfortable with that, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that. So back to the motion for going into public excluded. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We'll go into public excluded and